All right. Well, welcome this morning. Have with me Karen Gustafson. So blessed to have her come to talk to us. She's on the C&MA board of directors. She's been a missionary. She's been a leader in our denomination. Currently professor at Crown College, serves on our district LONCC, and most of all, Karen is a wealth of lived experience around helping walk with hurting people towards wholeness in Jesus. And that's what we want to talk about. There's a lot of hurting people that we're going to talk about how they're dealing with some really difficult times coming out of COVID and things happening in the Twin Cities. And so, Karen, just blessed that you are taking the time to be with us this morning and to teach us and to walk with us towards how to deal with trauma and loss and some of those things.
Well, Kyle, thank you for inviting me. And it's a real blessing to be here with you in the district. Have to clarify, I'm really learning all the time about all of this. And we are all learning together about all of this. So it's wonderful to have conversations.
Great. After our last conversation that we didn't record, I said it was kind of like I got a free hour of therapy. That's how I felt after we talked. So I'm going to invite all the rest of our district folks to a little free therapy session here. So you're welcome. If you want to donate to Karen, you can, but she's
Or to the district, to the
going to the
district.
district. There you go. That's great. So we have all experienced a lot of losses to varying degrees this year. As Christian leaders, COVID-19 gave us a loss of security, for some a loss of role or recognition, loss of ability to celebrate together big events like Good Friday, Easter, graduations. We have lost the immediate availability of positive reinforcement and feedback. We like it when people nod and smile at us, and on video that just doesn't work the same way. And it caused many of our pastors to feel alone and not sure how they were being perceived. This past week, with the killing of George Floyd and the subsequent unrest, there's even more losses many are experiencing. So this conversation we're having, just to be clear, isn't going to go into dealing with racism on an individual or systemic level. We're going to send out some resources around those things from some really great voices in the national office. But this is mainly a conversation that touches with loss and how we can lead others towards how to deal with losses in a healthy, Jesus-centered way. So, Karen, I want to just start with, can you explain how losses affect us? And we've talked a little bit about trauma, and maybe explain trauma and how is loss related to trauma? Maybe to start our conversation.
Yeah, so trauma, right, is a result of some devastating experience that happens to us, distressful, or it can be just this accumulation of so many stressors that we just feel overwhelmed, and starts to maybe even, the word might be kind of shatter us within, like shattering our hope, shattering kind of even maybe our identity, shattering what we've experienced before and our assumptions and expectations for the future, shattering, feeling safe. And it can like penetrate through our whole self. And I think one thing with loss, with crisis, trauma, also is remembering that we are created as whole beings, so that the trauma, that event, but also just that accumulating stress is felt within like our whole self. Our body feels it. Our blood pressure goes up, our muscles want to react. Our psyche feels it, in our thoughts maybe get confusing, hard to concentrate. Our emotions feel it. A lot of probably sadness, or even just numbing because it's too much. So we just kind of protect even our emotional self and quit feeling for a time. Certainly it affects our social life too. If we're feeling all of this, hard to relate to others in the same way as before, because of even our processing, just even physically, emotionally, mentally, just on high alert or numbing down. And of course, it can affect us spiritually. Absolutely. How do I relate to God right now? What is He doing in my life? How do I pray about this? So, yeah, it affects our whole life, really. And sometimes I think we can miss that it's not just the event that is causing all of this, what's kind of been added on to us. But it's like what you mentioned already, Kyle, about what's missing, what the losses have been, that kind of put us into that same feeling of confusion, of sadness, of kind of high alert, even within our biological self, or the numbing down. All kind of influences so much of ourself.
So we know that just statistically wise, an inordinate number of pastors deal with depression. And so I think the reason we wanted to talk about dealing with loss is that I think a lot of times pastors don't know how to deal with loss. I went through a season where a number of people had left our church, and I would get a phone call from someone, and the first thing that crossed my mind when my phone would ring was, oh no, they're going to tell me they're leaving our church. And I immediately had this like defensive posture because of these losses piling up. And I didn't have an outlet for how to deal with them in a healthy way. And it took a long time. It took a sabbatical and some other things of learning some new skills to realize how reactionary I was in that season. And I think this COVID-19 season has, because of the rate of depression amongst pastors, because of the amount of even small losses that we kind of listed there on the front end, we just really want to be aware that we need to deal with some of these losses so that we can re-engage in a healthy way. So I know we've talked about dealing with loss, you and I. What's the first step? Like, how do we even start dealing with losses? And to those of you who are watching, they might seem little, but they can pile up. And so how do we deal with these? Like, how do we take that step?
I think what you're saying, Kyle, is so important because we can, I think, as leaders, think, no, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or not even necessarily paying attention to what we are feeling, and just kind of get into the mode of kind of fixing the next thing, or doing the next plan that we have. Caring for our own soul is not always top of our list. But one thing that can kind of eat away at us is not paying attention to the losses. You can kind of think of loss as, this is not my idea, but Norman Wright is a Christian counselor who has written really powerful books in the past decades on helping through crisis. And he uses the illustration even of like a ball of yarn, and goes that loss is kind of at the center of a lot of what we can feel that just kind of keeps getting wrapped up. Of a loss can then feel like just sadness or shame, like I should have been able to do that better, or but I should be over this now, or that shouldn't be such a big deal to me. And it just kind of keeps getting wrapped up, and trying to ignore that doesn't really work because it is there, it's true, and will come out in kind of sapping our energy. I kind of think too, as church leaders, when somebody loses a family member, we don't say to them, oh, it's okay, don't feel bad, that person is in heaven, you should be happy. Well, yes, but we understand too, loss needs to be grieved.
Mm.
And that process is sort of like unraveling that ball of yarn and looking at the meaning of this loss and this loss, and kind of seeing the truth of what has been lost, naming it, looking at it, acknowledging it. Otherwise, it just kind of sits there and takes energy to just keep it undercover, keep it tight, to keep working on everything else. It just kind of saps us from the vitality that we desire.
So that takes a ton of work and self-awareness for most of us to take the time to look at the loss and just like call it for what it is.
Right.
Like, I'm really mad that I didn't get to do Easter with my church family. That's the highlight of my year, and that gets me through the hard times, is remembering that Easter and resurrection, and we had this great service, and that's a highlight. And now I missed that, and I don't know how I'm going to get through the rest of the year. To take time and name that, I think, is what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
like the first step. But we have to stop and look at that and look it square in the eye and just say, this is what I'm feeling around the losses I've experienced. And for some of us, maybe we've never done that, so we might have a big ball of yarn to unravel.
Yeah.
But probably for all of us, we have at least a little ball of yarn from coming out of this season, right?
Yeah. And the energy, could go back into, so next year I'm going to work really hard at getting my Easter service back exactly like what it was.
Hmm.
And I don't know if maybe that's where the energy necessarily should be put.
Yeah.
Uh,
So after we've named that, after we've looked at those and named those, and for me, I know sometimes my wife is really helpful in helping me name those things. Like, what's going on with you? Maybe I need to just, I like that, creating that vocabulary. What's your ball of yarn today? Maybe that's something we need to
let's unravel it a little here. And yeah.
unravel it. So if we do that hard work, after we do that hard work of looking at it and naming it, and a lot of times that might be a process because we just don't even know what it is until we've stopped to reflect and think about it. What's a next step after we do that?
Yeah, good. Can I just add in one more thing of like why do it? Because it does take so much work.
Yeah.
Um, Another illustration that I've used is, like what we're getting filled up with that starts to kind of get to the limit.
Mm-hmm.
We can usually control that okay, but if we're jarred, what we're holding spills out, right? And actually once in a retreat, I shouldn't have done this, but I had something almost all full with garbage and leftovers from the lunch, and I actually tripped while I was trying to show the illustration, and it all spilled out. Although, I mean, it fit the illustration. Yeah. So doing the hard work is also for the knowing that if I don't, kind of what is there simmering underneath my irritability or my frustration or just my sadness. Um, in normal times, probably will be okay. But when we're jarred with something new, that's kind of what comes out.
Yeah, that's
So the work is worth it. Also because of the next steps. Um, if we're able to, and people process different ways. I mean, I think uh, some of us, like me, we've been socialized and brought up to be very vocal about how we feel, like me. Others, it might be in different ways. I've had like children and teens also, including them in your families to kind of express by drawing. Or I had like a teen group once after something happened, gave all the teens a styrofoam cup. And I said, okay, and most were boys. And I said, are you going to tell me how you're feeling about this? And of course, they're not going to say anything. So show me with your styrofoam cup how you're feeling. And I had one teen boy take his pencil and just jab it through with holes.
mm,
And then, I would say, can you explain a little bit what are those holes? And, he started to say a few things, but acknowledging helps us to that next step of, okay, now I can start to write a new meaning, a new caption over this. And so, for instance, I started a couple months ago now, end of March, I started, I teach at Crown College. And so, I've been at home doing classes online, but we finished now, thankfully, but I can't wait for the fall. But I started a little list because I started feeling so tiny. And I started a list of, and I recognized, I guess, my grieving was just feeling so little because I couldn't do anything about anything and couldn't learn the technology very fast and all that. I just felt little. And I started writing a list that said, feeling little with Jesus.
mm,
And like a new meaning over, for me, what feeling little with Jesus meant. And my first line on my paper actually was, I feel I'm in his hands and that I don't have to figure all this out because he's big. I can be little. And so the next step, I think, is as we're acknowledging, is to kind of put a different title over our narration of, but this is what I'm learning. This is what this has meant to me. This is a next step of, okay, this has been awful, but the Lord showed me something that I had never seen before in this scripture. Or I was finally able to let go of feeling like I know what to do. Personally, I worked through feeling like I know what to do in a classroom. And that was just so a big loss for me. It was like, I don't know what to do in my classroom that's virtual. But being able to write over that, but it's okay that I didn't know what to do in my classroom. Others helped me. I learned new ways of relating to my students, but also my loss of, I couldn't really even be with my seniors that were graduating. When I named that, I thought, okay, I have to put a new meaning over. I couldn't be with my seniors. And so my new meaning was I can find their home addresses, and I sent them graduation cards, which I've never written graduation cards to all the seniors because I would be in person with them.
Yeah.
And so I think taking the time um, to move into new responses is really important. Also because if you kind of think of the energy part too, when there's a stress, when there's a threat, we tend to, right, either flee or fight or freeze. And in our leadership, I think without recognizing, okay, what is this threat that I'm feeling or this loss, we might stay in that I've this is feels threatening to me, but we don't acknowledge what might it be, so we can flee, like try to ignore it, try to just go on and put all our energy in that, or we try to fight back, control somehow and make it work. And that probably isn't where my energy should go, to control it all, or just freezing and that energy. So naming, finding what is it that really is happening to me actually will be freeing to say, okay, now my next step I can move into with some new energy of, okay, what's the new meaning here? What's my next step that can be helpful?
Yeah. Yeah, as you were talking, I thought of pastors who have been doing online services, and I know we're starting to come back, but to name some of the difficulties of that, and then also to say, wow, we figured out a bunch of stuff that's going to long-term help our church
Yeah.
technologically. We should have probably been having, most pastors would say, oh, we should have been posting stuff a long time ago. We just never did. And now we can maybe name this as new avenues of interacting with our community or letting people know that we're out there, all of those things that we had to figure out as
Yes.
we come out of this. And but we have to do that hard work to name the loss that we've experienced before we just jump to the let's put frosting over a piece of garbage. Like, let's rename the piece of garbage and say
Right.
this is what it is. And
Yeah.
the thing I've been learning so much is that God is an always inviting, always redeeming God. Whatever
Yes.
brokenness from the enemy that comes at us or comes at our world, God is always inviting the next redemption. And
Amen.
so
Yes.
COVID-19 was this like evil, I mean, it's a disease, but it just like affected us in all these ways where the enemy used it to put so much evil and doubt in people's hearts and in their minds.
Yes.
Name that, we can say, and God redeemed that in these ways. And there's
Yes.
that invitation. God's always saying, here's what's next. Um, and the other thing I'm learning is we can't miss that invitation, because
Mhm.
if we miss it, God just invites it again. so,
That's good.
so
Yes.
we can't be stuck thinking, oh, God wanted me to learn this and I missed it. Like, well, God will give you that opportunity. He's right now, he's inviting
Yes.
you to learn and say yes and move into that. So I think this process you're describing is really profound and powerful for us to think through for our own lives. Now let me turn here to maybe one last question.
Yeah.
So we keep it in a time frame that people will watch.
That's
uh,
good.
so not only have we as pastors and leaders been dealing with this, every one of our people in every one of our churches has been dealing with this kind of loss. And they probably need to walk through a similar process of naming the losses and renaming them, and maybe setting a new trajectory. Do you have any thoughts of how would a pastor, a church, a leader create spaces or avenues for people, our congregants, people attending our church, maybe even, I mean, people outside the church who don't even believe in Jesus need to do this too, right?
Mm.
They're feeling this and looking for a space to walk through this kind of process. Any tips, ideas, thoughts for how to create those kind of spaces and avenues for people?
One real simple way, I think, is just kind of narrating the story and asking people to narrate their story, um, giving people space, time to say, tell me your story of these past, couple months. Just tell me your story. I say even do it with children, even with teens, or what, again, maybe it's drawing a picture or somehow what's your story, but then actually helping people name what have they been labeling their story as. Like, have you been labeling these last 2 months as the greatest frustration in your life? Have you been naming it as isolation, as devastation, or these past 2 months, I've lost my identity of who I really am? And then specifically ask, okay, what could be some new names to your story? And not tell the people this is how your story is going to be redeemed or bought back by God, but even introducing that. I love that concept of redemption, of buying back. How would you say, and the scripture, if they're Christians or if they're not, even asking them if you could put a new name on, what would you put on for the future as you go ahead from this story?
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And I think it's a great avenue for our discipleship and our churches to go deeper. This is a time where people need that space to process this. I know people who this has been a really good time for them. They've got more time with
Right.
kids, they're able to work. And then I know people who've lost their jobs or have just had real devastation in their families, and and we don't know until we ask how their story is being told. So I think this framework could be really impactful for people who are, it was okay, but then it also opens the door for people who are truly devastated that honestly might not even say it. In a lot of
Right.
church life, we just say, I mean, we're here in the upper Midwest. How are you doing? Oh, I'm okay. I talked to a business owner on Thursday morning after riots in St. Paul, and I'm standing on the rubble of his business. How are you doing? Well, I'm okay. Like, well, this is how we can be standing in the rubble, and we'll still say that we're
Yes.
so.
Yes.
A process like this makes us stop and say, this is my story, and in the telling of the story and the naming of it might let people say that they're not okay, because if we just ask, are you okay, we know the answer,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something that feels like you are loved when someone hears your story and it's accepted.
Mm.
Um, I think certainly, all of the ways that we can show kindness to others is huge right now. And one of the most powerful ways that people feel loved is when their story is heard and it's acknowledged.
Mm.
And it doesn't mean I have to agree the way that they are, have lived that story at all. It just means they feel loved and I am loving them as
Yeah,
I hear their story and acknowledge it.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for this time and this wisdom. And the truth is, pastors, leaders, it is, if you're feeling lonely or unloved, find a safe person to tell your story to of what the last few months have been experienced like for you. I know our office, we're always open to hear those stories. If you have a spouse or another friend that you can talk to, unfurl the yarn a little bit, unwind a couple steps, because I do think that God will redeem your story, will redeem your church, and will provide amazing opportunities for redemption of your community. So, Karen, thanks again.
Thank
And
you, Kyle. Blessings to you and to everyone.